There is something strange that happens to most people, and almost nobody stops to question it. You get hungry at the same time every day. Not roughly the same time, not around the same hour. The same time. 12:30, 1 o'clock, 6:15 in the evening. Day after day, almost to the minute, your body sends the exact same signal. Now, most people assume this is habit. Conditioning, Pavlovian repetition. You ate at noon for 1,000 days, so now your brain expects food at noon. But that explanation is incomplete. And when you look at what is actually happening inside your cells, the real answer is far stranger and far more interesting than anything you were taught in school. Because your hunger is not triggered by an empty stomach. It is not triggered by low blood sugar. It is not triggered by willpower fading or discipline breaking down. Your hunger is triggered by a clock, a molecular clock, one that exists inside nearly every cell in your body, one that has been running since before you were born, and one that has been quietly synchronized to your environment your entire life without you ever knowing it was happening. And before we go any further, I want to tell you something. There is a name, a specific gene sitting right now inside your cells that is responsible for this. A gene that was only identified in the 1990s, that won its discoverers a Nobel Prize, and that most people have never heard of. We are going to get to that. But first, you need to understand something that will change the way you think about hunger, about eating, and about your body for the rest of your life. You do not have one clock. You have trillions. Every organ in your body, your liver, your gut, your pancreas, your fat tissue, your muscle cells, they all carry their own internal timekeeping system. And all of them are running on roughly the same 24-hour cycle. Scientists call this the circadian clock, from the Latin circa dies, meaning about a day. And in 2017, 3 American researchers, Jeffrey Hall, Michael Rosbash, and Michael Young, won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for figuring out exactly how it works at the molecular level. What they found inside living cells was one of the most elegant biological mechanisms ever discovered. A feedback loop so precise, so self-regulating, so deeply conserved across species that it forced the scientific community to completely rethink what biological time actually means. Here is what they found. Inside the nucleus of your cells, there is a gene called clock. That name is not metaphorical. It stands for Circadian Locomotor Output Cycles, caput, and it produces a protein. That protein binds to another protein produced by a partner gene called BMAL1. Together, the clock and BMAL1 proteins form a complex that acts as the master activator of your internal timer. When this complex is active, it binds to specific regions of your DNA and switches on a cascade of downstream genes, including 2 critical ones called period and cryptochrome. Over the next several hours, the proteins produced by period and cryptochrome gradually accumulate inside the cell. And here is the part that makes this system so remarkable. Once they reach a high enough concentration, those same proteins loop back and physically block the clock BML1 complex that created them. The system turns itself off. Then, as the period and cryptochrome proteins slowly degrade and disappear, the suppression lifts. Clock and BMAL1 become active again. The whole cycle restarts. This feedback loop takes approximately 24 hours to complete one full rotation, and it runs continuously, automatically, in nearly every cell in your body, whether you eat or not, whether you sleep or not, whether the sun is shining or not. It is not metaphorical clockwork. It is literal molecular clockwork, ticking inside you right now as you listen to this. Now here is where hunger enters the picture. Your body produces a hormone called ghrelin. You have probably heard of it. It is commonly described as the hunger hormone, and that description is accurate, but it is also deeply misleading because it implies that ghrelin rises when you need food. When the tank is running low, when your body is running short on fuel and sends an alert. That is not what the research shows. What the research shows is that ghrelin does not primarily respond to caloric need. It responds to the clock. In a landmark study, participants who fasted completely for 24 hours, consuming nothing, still showed sharp ghrelin peaks at the exact times they normally ate. Their stomachs were empty. Their blood sugar had been stable for hours. There was no physiological fuel deficit that would explain the signal. But the clock said it was lunchtime. So ghrelin surged anyway. The hunger arrived on schedule. because the schedule was never about the food. It was always about the clock anticipating the food. Think about what that means. Your body begins preparing for a meal before you are consciously hungry. Ghrelin starts rising. Gastric acid is secreted. Digestive enzymes are queued up. Insulin sensitivity in your tissues shifts in anticipation of incoming glucose. Your entire digestive machinery runs a preparation cycle, triggered not by the arrival of food, but by the prediction that food is coming. A prediction based entirely on when food has come before. Your body is not reacting to hunger. It is scheduling it. And that schedule is encoded in the molecular clock running inside your cells. This is the moment where you need to sit with the full weight of what that means for how you have been thinking about your own eating. You have been interpreting your afternoon hunger as your body telling you it needs calories. You have been interpreting your lunchtime appetite as a fuel signal. But for most people, most of the time, that signal is not primarily about need. It is about timing. It is a standing appointment set years ago, reinforced by thousands of repetitions, now running so deep in your cellular biology that even total fasting cannot cancel it. The hunger you feel at noon is less like a gas gauge reading empty and more like an alarm clock that has been set for noon every day for the last decade, whether or not you actually need to wake up. And this changes everything about how you should think about changing your eating habits. When you try to skip a meal, when you push lunch back by 2 hours, when you start an intermittent fasting protocol that does not match your historical eating window, the resistance you feel is not weakness. It is not lack of discipline. It is not your metabolism failing. It is a molecular clock that has been calibrated to your old schedule, doing exactly what it was built to do, firing ghrelin, priming digestion, creating the biological experience of hunger at the time it learned to expect food. You are not fighting a craving. You are fighting a timer. And knowing that distinction does not make the hunger disappear, but it fundamentally changes your relationship to it. Now, here is where the science opens into something even more remarkable, because the circadian system inside your body is not a single clock. It is a network of clocks, and they do not all answer to the same authority. The master clock, the conductor of the entire system, lives in a tiny region of the hypothalamus at the base of your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN. The SCN contains roughly 20,000 neurons, and it takes its primary timing signal from a very specific input, blue wavelength light hitting specialized photoreceptors in your retina. When morning light enters your eyes, it sends a signal directly to the SCN that says, in molecular terms, today has started. This moment is time 0. The master clock resets, and it then sends synchronization signals downstream to every peripheral clock in your body, telling the liver, the gut, the pancreas, the muscles, the adrenal glands what time it is. But here is the critical detail that changes everything. The peripheral clocks, the ones in your organs and tissues, do not rely exclusively on the master clock for their timing. They also respond to a second input: food. Specifically, to the timing of nutrient arrival, glucose spikes, insulin release, and the activation of digestive processes. This means your peripheral clocks can be calibrated by 2 different signals, light and eating, and those 2 signals do not always agree. If you eat late at night consistently, your liver clock, your gut clock, your pancreatic clock, they begin to shift. They start anticipating food arrival in the late evening. They adjust enzyme secretion, insulin response, fat storage signals to align with the time food actually arrives. Meanwhile, your SCN, responding to light, continues to tell your brain that the active metabolic phase of the day is daytime. You end up with a brain that thinks it is morning and a liver that thinks it is midnight. Scientists call this state circadian misalignment, and the metabolic consequences of sustained circadian misalignment are not subtle. Studies show that people who eat the majority of their calories late in the day, even when total caloric intake is identical to people who eat earlier, show significantly higher insulin resistance, impaired fat oxidation, elevated triglycerides, disrupted cortisol rhythms, and higher markers of systemic inflammation. The timing of the food matters independently of the food itself, not because there is anything wrong with eating at night in isolation, but because eating at night when your master clock has already wound down the metabolic machinery for the day forces your peripheral organs to operate against the timing signal coming from the brain. Your cells receive contradictory instructions, and metabolic efficiency falls. This is the biological reason why shift workers, people whose light exposure and eating schedules are permanently misaligned with the solar day, show dramatically elevated rates of metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and certain cancers. It is not sleep deprivation alone. Sleep-deprived people who maintain consistent circadian timing do not show the same degree of metabolic disruption. The damage comes specifically from the misalignment, from having clocks in the same body running on different schedules, pulling the metabolic machinery in opposite directions, day after day, year after year. But here is what is important to understand. This system is not fixed. It is adjustable, slowly and with consistent input, but genuinely adjustable. Because the peripheral clocks respond to food timing, you can shift them by shifting when you eat. If you consistently eat your first meal at 8 in the morning and your last meal at 6 in the evening, your liver clock, your gut clock, your pancreatic clock will gradually realign to that window. Over days to weeks, they will begin anticipating food at 8. Ghrelin will begin peaking in the hour before that first meal. Digestive enzymes will be cued and ready. Insulin sensitivity will be highest during the window when glucose is actually arriving. The hunger clock itself will reset. The standing appointments will move, and the entire metabolic system will operate with the efficiency that comes from all of its timekeepers running in sync. This is the real biological mechanism behind time-restricted eating, not caloric restriction, not metabolic rate manipulation. Clock synchronization. When you compress your eating into a consistent daily window that aligns with daylight, you are giving your peripheral clocks a coherent, consistent timing signal. You are telling your liver and your gut and your pancreas that food arrives during this window and not outside it. And over time, those organs adjust their entire hormonal and enzymatic output to match. The body becomes more efficient, not because it is receiving less food, but because all of its clocks finally agree on what time it is. Now, step back for a moment, because the story goes much deeper than human metabolism. The circadian clock is not a mammalian invention. It is not even a vertebrate invention. It is one of the oldest biological systems on Earth. Versions of this same molecular feedback loop have been found in plants, in fungi, in single-celled cyanobacteria. The specific proteins differ across species, but the underlying logic, a self-sustaining 24-hour oscillator built from gene expression feedback, is conserved across nearly all domains of life. The current scientific consensus is that circadian clocks evolved more than 3 billion years ago in the very earliest life forms, long before complex multicellular organisms existed. Why so early? Because of this planet. The rotation of the Earth creates the most reliable, most predictable environmental signal in the history of life on this planet. Every 24 hours, without exception, for 4.5 billion years, the sun has risen and set, light and dark, warm and cool, photons available and photons absent. Any organism that could anticipate this cycle rather than simply react to it gained an enormous selective advantage. It could gear up its photosynthetic machinery before the sun arrived. It could protect its DNA during the hours of maximum UV exposure. It could time its reproduction to the season of the year most favorable for offspring survival. The circadian clock is evolution's answer to the most consistent and ancient variable on Earth, the 24-hour turn of the planet itself. And because that variable has never changed, the molecular machinery for tracking it has been conserved across billions of years of divergent evolution, preserved in every branch of the tree of life, including you. Every cell in your body carries the fossil record of that ancient adaptation. Every time the clock gene activates and the period proteins begin to accumulate, you are watching a molecular process that is older than plants, older than animals, older than anything you would recognize as complex life. You are carrying, in the nucleus of every cell, a biological clock that predates the dinosaurs by 2.5 billion years. And here is the last thought I want to leave you with. You have been taught to think of hunger as a simple signal. Body needs fuel, body sends hunger, you eat, signal stops, input, output, stimulus, response. But what you actually have is something far more sophisticated. You have a predictive metabolic system, a system that does not wait to be told it needs food. A system that learns when food has historically arrived, builds a molecular schedule around that pattern, and begins preparing your entire digestive and hormonal infrastructure in advance, so that when the food arrives, your body is already primed to receive it at maximum efficiency. Hunger is not the beginning of the process. It is the end of a preparation cycle that started hours before you felt anything. Your body has been getting ready for this meal since long before you were conscious of wanting it. So the next time you feel that familiar pull at exactly the same time as yesterday, pause for just a moment before you reach for food. You are not feeling an empty stomach. You are not feeling willpower crumbling. You are feeling the output of a molecular clock that has been ticking inside living organisms since the first cells learned to tell time on this rotating planet. You are feeling 3 billion years of evolutionary precision, encoded in your genes, synchronized to the spin of the Earth, announcing that the schedule says it is time to eat. That is not habit. That is not psychology. That is applied biology, running in real time, inside you, right now. And that is worth something, not just as a fact to know, but as a framework to carry. Because once you understand that your hunger is scheduled, that your cravings are timed, that your metabolic rhythms are coordinated by molecular clocks that respond to light and food, and the predictable turning of this planet, you stop being a passive recipient of those signals. You start being someone who can read them, work with them, and if needed, slowly and deliberately reset them. Not by fighting your biology, but by finally understanding it. The researchers who won the Nobel Prize in 2017 did not just discover a gene. They revealed a fundamental organizing principle of life on Earth. Every living thing that has ever existed on this planet has had to solve the same problem: how to prepare for what has not yet arrived, how to anticipate the future based on the patterns of the past. The circadian clock is biology's oldest and most elegant solution to that problem. And it is running inside you, right now, ticking toward your next meal, preparing your body for a future it already expects, carrying forward an inheritance that is 3 billion years old, and still, after all that time, working exactly as designed. The next time you wonder why you cannot just skip lunch without feeling like your body is staging a protest, remember this. You are not fighting a craving. You are facing a clock, one of the oldest clocks on Earth, set long before you had any say in the matter, running on a schedule that predates every human civilization, every language, every idea anyone has ever had about food or hunger or discipline or health. That clock does not care about your diet plan. But if you learn to work with it, align your eating window with your light exposure, synchronize the signals you send your peripheral organs, give all of your clocks the same consistent input, it will work with you more efficiently, more predictably, and more powerfully than any protocol you could layer on top of it. Because the most advanced nutritional technology available to you is not a supplement. It is not a formula. It is not an app. It is a 3 billion-year-old molecular timer that already lives inside every cell of your body. You just have to learn to read the clock. Let me take you one step further, because there is a dimension of this story that most people never reach, and it is the one that, once you see it, you cannot unsee. We have been talking about the circadian clock as a hunger regulator, but ghrelin and meal timing are just one output of one clock in one tissue. The circadian system coordinates virtually every physiological process in your body on a 24-hour schedule. Your cortisol, the hormone most associated with stress, peaks in the early morning before you wake up to mobilize energy for the coming day. Your core body temperature follows a precise circadian arc, lowest around 4 in the morning, highest in the late afternoon, and that temperature curve directly influences your reaction time, your muscle performance, your cognitive sharpness. Your immune system has a circadian rhythm. Certain immune cells are most active at night during the repair and regeneration phase of the cycle. Your cardiovascular system follows the clock. Blood pressure, clotting factors, and inflammatory markers all vary predictably across the 24-hour cycle, which is why heart attacks and strokes peak in the early morning hours, when the transition from sleep to activity stresses a system that is still shifting between its nighttime and daytime operating modes. Your liver performs different biochemical functions at different times of day. Certain detoxification pathways are most active at night. Fat storage and mobilization follow the clock. Drug metabolism follows the clock, which is why the same medication at the same dose can have significantly different effects depending on what time of day you take it. This is an entire field of medicine, chronopharmacology, built on the recognition that the body's response to chemical compounds is not static. It changes hour by hour, according to where you are in your circadian cycle. Even your DNA repair mechanisms are circadian. The enzymes responsible for finding and correcting errors in your genetic code are most active during specific phases of the 24-hour cycle. This is part of why chronic circadian disruption is associated with elevated cancer risk. It is not just about sleep. It is about the timing of cellular maintenance. When you chronically disrupt your circadian rhythms, you are not just making yourself tired and hungry at the wrong times. You are impairing the scheduled maintenance program that keeps your cells from accumulating damage over decades. All of this is coordinated, not by a central processor, not by conscious control, not by any single organ or hormone, but by a distributed network of molecular clocks, each cell keeping its own time, each organ synchronizing its clocks to its neighbors, all of them ultimately tracing their rhythm back to the most primal environmental signal on Earth. The light of the sun, arriving each morning over the horizon of a spinning planet. You are not a machine that runs on food. You are a timed machine that runs on food at the right times. And the difference between those two descriptions is the difference between understanding your body as a simple input-output system and understanding it as what it actually is, a choreographed biological symphony, with every instrument playing its part on a schedule written into your genome before you drew your first breath. So when you feel hungry at noon, you are not just feeling a simple biological need. You are hearing one note in that symphony, the Ghrelin note, timed, precise, ancient. Part of a score that includes your cortisol and your body temperature and your immune activity and your DNA repair machinery and the rhythm of every organ in your body, all of them following the same conductor, all of them synchronized to the same signal, the light of the sun and the memory of when food last arrived, converging every day into the seamless, automatic, 3 billion-year-old performance that you experience simply as being alive. That is what is happening when you reach for lunch. That is what applied biology looks like from the inside. There is one more thing worth saying before we close, because it brings everything back to the beginning. Back to that strange experience of feeling hungry at the exact same time, day after day, that most people have written off as routine or coincidence or simple habit. It is none of those things. It is memory. Not the kind of memory stored in your brain, not a conscious recollection, not a learned behavior in the psychological sense. It is molecular memory. A record of your past eating schedule, written into the expression patterns of genes in your liver and your gut and your hypothalamus. Every meal you have eaten at the same time over the years has reinforced that pattern. Every consistent feeding cue has deepened the groove in the molecular clockwork. And now that memory runs automatically, below consciousness, below sensation, in the chemistry of cells that have no nervous system, no brain, no capacity for thought, but that nonetheless keep perfect time and that fire their hormonal signals at the appointed hour, every single day, because that is what they were trained to do. This is, in the most literal biological sense, the body remembering. Not the brain, the cells, the organs, the molecular machinery itself. Remembering when food came. Remembering when to be ready. Remembering the schedule of your life in the language of gene expression and hormone release and enzyme activation. A chemical autobiography, written over years, playing back every day in the rhythm of your hunger. And the most striking thing about that fact is not how strange it is how ordinary it feels from the inside. That is the genius of the circadian system. It runs so smoothly, so silently, so precisely, that you have probably never once questioned why you are hungry when you are hungry. It just felt like hunger, like your body doing what bodies do, like normal. But now you know what normal actually is. Normal is 3 billion years of molecular timekeeping running in every cell of your body, synchronizing your hunger and your hormones and your metabolism to the spin of the earth, firing a precisely timed Ghrelin surge that you experience as the simple, ordinary, unremarkable feeling of wanting lunch. That is applied biology, and it has been happening inside you every day of your life.